So we would like to start actually the last paper session of the Global Composition Address. So my name is Natascha Rieberg. I'm a sound artist and a team member of the Soundscape and Environmental Media Lab here from the University of Applied Sciences in Darmstadt. And I would like to introduce you our first presenter for today. Her name is Claire Lenovel, and she's a sound artist from Los Angeles. And in her paper, she will present us her project Acoustic Connectivity in a Synthetic Ecology. Thank you.
Hello everybody, my name is Claire Lenoble, and as Natasha just said, today I'll be presenting about my master's thesis project, which is called Acoustic Connectivity in a Synthetic Ecology. I'd like to begin my talk by introducing myself and talking a little bit about my background. I was born and raised in Vancouver, British Columbia. And several years ago, I got an undergraduate degree in visual arts from the University of Victoria. And during this time, I devoted myself to a practice in sound art. And so I also took a lot of courses in world music and music composition and upper-level computer music. So I developed a body of work which consisted of audio-visual environments, which were always sculptural and often interactive for subjects. My goal was to create spaces where people could engage with acoustic and psychoacoustic phenomena to ultimately gain a deeper relationship with sound. Sorry.
No.
The slide's not moving.
I think your connection has disconnected.
Okay, sorry about that. Does anyone know the Wi-Fi password offhand?
You can choose the HCI event. Was it shown on the list? Yeah, events.hda. You know it by heart.
No, I have it.
Oh, thanks. I don't know what's going on.
It shows up now.
I'm just going to go like this for this slide, because maybe it was a big file. After I finished my undergrad, I moved to Los Angeles to do a master's degree in media design practices at Art Center College of Design. And during my master's, I started to introduce speculative design methodologies into my practice. So to give a bit of context, speculative design is an anti-solutionist discipline where designers pose what-if questions in order to generate critical discourses about the kinds of futures people want and don't want. Oh my gosh, I don't know what to do.
Just click through like that.
Okay.
And you'll be better off.
Cool, thanks.
Sure.
And so by integrating speculative design with my previous work in sound art, my goal is to open up new areas of discussion about the impact of emerging technology, such as Internet of Things, on the future of our soundscapes. So today I'm going to present documentation of acoustic connectivity in a synthetic ecology, and I'm going to talk about how this networked ecology works, and then I'm going to discuss the implications and trajectories for my research. But before I delve into the details of my thesis, I would like to mention this quote from Murray Schafer's The Tuning of the World. Soundscape design should consist of studying the effects of new sounds before they are indiscriminately released into the environment, in order to use these insights in planning future environments for man. For me, this quote creates a really wonderful opportunity to bring speculative design into the context of soundscape ecology, and it opens up a really loaded platform for discussion about the emergence of Internet of Things networks and how they will impact possible soundscapes. What can we learn when networked ecologies are designed as a way to explore the behaviors of a synthetic ecological system? And how can networked ecologies contribute to their soundscapes? Oh, gosh. I'm imagining a world where networked ecologies will reside ubiquitously in our environments, and I'm wondering what their relationship to soundscapes will be like. In this evolving sound environment, there are 3 species of bird-inspired entities. Just like in an Internet of Things ecology, these entities are all completely physically autonomous from one another. But unlike a traditional Internet of Things ecology, these entities do not use Bluetooth or internet to communicate with one another. Instead, they communicate acoustically using simple solenoid motors which hit physical objects, and microphones to sense the acoustic landscape. And so the microphones are located inside these pink wind fluffies. Each of these bird-inspired entities uses a Raspberry Pi microcontroller, which is the little green device on this piece of acrylic, and some code that I wrote in a language called Pure Data in order to process the sounds that they are sensing in different ways and then respond accordingly. And I find that this ability to listen selectively and react in unique ways gives each species of entity a personality in a strange way, so I like to describe their behaviors like this. While a duet of songbirds flirt with one another, a chorus of mockingbirds spread gossip above, and below a peacock erupts from jealousy. So there are 2 songbird entities, and they flirt back and forth melodically using pitched glass domes. They're located in the middle tier of this installation, and they each have alto, soprano, and piccolo voices. And as you might have heard, the 2 birds have microtonal differences in their sounds because of the very subtle differences in their glass domes. And so using pure data and machine learning, each songbird is trained on the sounds of the other bird's calls and is designed to filter out other environmental sounds. But of course, when the ambient soundscape is too loud, they may not hear one another, which causes their duet to come to a halt. And other times, a songbird entity may misinterpret indeterminacy in the soundscape as a call from the other songbird, which starts up their conversation again. There are 4 mockingbird entities in this environment, and they strike wooden surfaces to gossip with one another, forming the rhythmic backdrop for this composition. Because of their high-pitched sounds and their sensitivity to noise, the mockingbirds are situated in the highest tier of this environment, above the songbirds. The mockingbirds listen for sounds above an amplitude threshold, and then they reiterate them as rhythmic sequences using their solenoids. So for example, if I was walking through the installation like this, a few seconds later they would reproduce these sounds. Like the songbirds, each mockingbird is pitched very slightly differently, even though their pieces of wood are about the same size. And they're the most simple of the entities with regard to their programming, because they're not designed to be selective of pitch or timbre in their listening, but just amplitude, which means that when the soundscape is really loud or noisy, they tend to become really active. And lastly, we have the jealous peacock, who produces a dynamic crescendo when it ruffles its metal plumes. The peacock resides in the lowest tier of this environment and is composed of 4 solenoids, which each strike a bent strip of aluminum. The strips of aluminum are bent to different tensions, which gives each plume a slightly different pitch. And again, using machine learning and pure data, the peacock is trained to listen specifically for the sounds of the songbirds. And when he detects that they are singing back and forth too much, he gets jealous and has an eruption. And when the peacock erupts, it tends to be quite loud, and so this causes the mockingbirds to congregate and squawk as well. The majority of my recent work is inspired by this phenomenon that birds in urban environments are changing their calls as an adaptation to increasing levels of anthropogenic noise. My thesis proposes bird communication as a framework for thinking about network connectivity. If acoustically connected ecologies exist in urban spaces, which have high levels of noise, how might they learn to adapt to their environment in order to retain connectivity? I'm suggesting that these adaptations could take different forms, such as learning to make sounds at different times, learning to make sounds in different ways, and learning to listen to sound in different ways. So let's imagine a scenario where a networked ecology exists in a city like LA, where traffic is really busy in the morning. First, I imagine that an ecology could learn these traffic patterns over time and then communicate more actively either before or after the rush hour, so that more messages are transmitted on average. Secondly, I imagine that these networked entities could adapt their sounds so that they become differentiated from traffic sounds. And of course, in the case of my installation, because they're making sounds using physical objects, it would be difficult for them to, say, adapt their pitches. But maybe they could communicate using very specialized rhythms that are easier to pick out from the traffic sounds. And lastly, I think that a networked entity could adapt its methods of listening in order to communicate with the rest of the ecology. So using machine learning, I imagine that these entities could learn to filter out other environmental noise during peak traffic hours in order to discern signal from noise most effectively. So how will the messages of these networked ecologies tune the soundscapes that surround them? As these synthetic ecologies adapt to their environments, I imagine that they could develop regional accents that are different from ecologies in other cities or towns. And I imagine that these sounds could contribute to a place's identity, forming sonic landmarks in our environments. And so this causes me to wonder, as networked ecologies develop acoustic vocabularies in adaptation to their soundscapes, who will understand the lexicon of these sounds? People who reside in these areas may learn to attribute meaning to these sounds over time. But would other people from different areas interpret these sounds as abstract musical calls? And I'm thinking about this in relation to European church bells, which can be rung in different ways to indicate times for prayer or events like weddings or funerals. To the people of these areas, these bell sounds are embedded with meaning. But to an outsider from North America like myself, although these bell sounds are beautiful, I wouldn't necessarily know if they were communicating a funeral or a wedding. So I hope that through my research and my installation, I can create a platform for discussion between soundscape ecologists and media designers and product designers. And I hope that through these discussions, we can speculate about possible, plausible, probable, and preferable futures and future soundscapes. How can we use art and design to make conscious decisions about the sounds we are introducing to our environments and their meaning? My project isn't intending to imply a solution. I'm not saying that these entities from my installation should literally be ubiquitous in our environments, but envisioning a very likely future in which Internet of Things technology is deployed throughout urban spaces, it's really important to pose questions about the role that they could have in our soundscapes. So referring back to what Schaefer said, my goal is to use my practice in sound art and speculative design as a platform for inquiry about the kinds of sounds that could be introduced to our environments in order to use these insights in planning future environments for man. And to close off, I would like to mention where I'm interested in taking my research in the future, and I welcome suggestions. I want to continue to build out experiential work like this, but in future installations, I want these ecologies to actually develop more complex languages over time, because in my installation, you get an amplitude build up and then it fades off, but actually in reality, over days and days, the sounds that they are making aren't really changing. And so to that effect, I would be interested in doing something like taking two versions of the same ecology and deploying them in different parts of a city or different cities in order to observe how they evolved to be different from one another. And so that means I also want to be bringing my work out of the gallery space and into the real world. And I would like to develop more specificity in what these acoustic messages actually mean, because right now they are mostly just sounds, but part of the reason that that audible data transfers are important is because people can perceive them. And I think that might be important in a world where our data is constantly being collected. I'd like to use these sounds as a form of transparency for citizens of an environment. And lastly, I want to explore opportunities for co-design through field research and workshopping, because I think it's really important to integrate more diverse cultural perspectives into this area of soundscape design. So I hope to make this work more collaborative in the future. Thank you.
For the great presentation and the introduction to your artwork. So, are there questions or remarks to Claire?
Or suggestions on what I can, where I can take this research?
Just a little question. Have you also thought about migration? Like some birds just migrate to another habitat when it becomes too loud and too,
Right.
when the ideal conditions go away. And so how would you respond to that?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think it would be fun to explore that through a little literal approach using actual moving parts. And then I think another thing that I would be interested in thinking about is like reproduction and how I guess these sounds can contribute to reproduction in some way. One of the things that inspired my direction with this thesis is because the area I was living in Los Angeles had a lot of exotic birds brought in, like peacocks and parrots, and they were starting to go feral after a while and really influence the soundscape. And so it was something about their communication that seemed to dominate the space, and then that allowed them to reproduce quickly and then become feral.
I'm interested in the contrast between our keynote this morning and your presentation. I'm curious to know in 50 years, where your work will take you, because you're looking at not so much preserving existing sounds, but designing sounds and interactive systems for the future, which is both good and bad. It's not bad, but it's both good and sad, in the sense that you feel compelled to adapt to shifting environments. And so I encourage you to continue this path, because you are feeling the need to go there artistically and socially. And I have to be honest, I don't fully understand all of what you're doing, but it's certainly a new path for me, and it's exciting, and I wish you luck.
Thank you.
Yeah. Time for one more? Maybe you can just clarify this, and maybe I just missed it, but we started this discussion talking about the Internet of Things, and I wasn't quite recognizing your correlation, because then we went to a more, the acoustic environment, the felt or real acoustic environment. So are you making a suggestion about our conscientiousness about the acoustic environment in the actual Internet of Things as well?
Well, not all Internet of Things devices communicate through Bluetooth and Internet. There are actually, like Chirp is a company that's using sound, actually, creating these kind of sonic barcodes to communicate with other physical objects. And I guess what I'm proposing through my research is that if these kinds of IoT ecologies are going to be all throughout our environment, we should study what these sounds are going to be like and how they'll impact humans, how other species will react to them. So it's sort of a premeditation of like what
of the
potentially our
presence
future
right,
might be
presence
like.
to come. Okay.
But obviously through a very like artistic interpretation, because it, like obviously if these Internet of Things devices existed, they're not going to be making sound with motors and things like that. But it's my approach is limitation as a design opportunity, and it's also my position because I like to work physically. And also, sorry, one last thing, because acoustic sounds have the potential to create a richer soundscape than those tiny little speakers in a Chirp device ever could. So that's my decision with that.
Great, thanks for that clarification.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. I think there's much things to discuss in that field, and I really appreciate your approach to build on the insights of acoustic ecology, really this future-wise thinking and considering new and also suspecting new technologies in such a creative way. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So
the next speaker would be not Mr. Purple, but you wrote the paper together, right? So
That's right.
no, I have the wrong paper in front of me.
I'm Robert.
Robert Kramer, right? I'm sorry. We introduced each other right in front, but my head has blown after all these days full of programs. So, Robert Kramer is a research associate at the University of Applied Sciences in Ansbach, focusing on sound interaction, and he's in the field, in the program multimedia communication. And he will present us a paper that he actually wrote together with Professor Dr. Cornelius Purple. Yes, introducing us on paradigms of audio program language. So
Once I get my computer to start.
yes, I think it will be very fast, as we tested it before. Should we go?
Yeah, should go.
Okay, so great.
Just a little disclaimer in beforehand. This is a rather theoretical talk. There is not so much about sound. It's more about the means of sound production or composition or algorithmic composition, so I hope I won't disappoint you. The paper I present today is a result from my research on audio programming languages. Audio programming languages are basically domain-specific languages. In such a domain-specific language, certain views, ideas, models about music are inscribed. And I'd like to find out to what extent such views take their effect on the actual musical result. Well, the paper we wrote is only a first step into a systematic approach to this research question. The concept of paradigm can be understood in different ways. It can be conceived either with respect to Thomas S. Kuhn, I don't know whether you know him, who focuses on the development of science, or as computer science understands it, as a category of programming styles. And for the sake of clarity, we more generally use it in the sense of a conceptual model of how something is thought to exist or to behave. And this broad definition originates from an article by Andrew Gerstzo entitled Paradigms in Computer Music. So what we try to establish is to give an overview of the problems and views involved when it comes to paradigmatic thinking in music. So we therefore first focused on how computer science approaches this topic, then had a look at how different aspects are discussed in computer and art, and finally how the discussion of computer music, of paradigms in computer music appears. Of course, our contribution is only based on a small snippet or of the whole discourse to be analyzed and taken into account. Also, we didn't try to retrace historical developments. This would just be beyond the scope of such a format. However, if you want to have such a concise history, you could have a look in the computer music tutorial by Curtis Rhodes, which is still relevant and the most concise publication on this topic. However, I have to mention that programming languages, audio programming languages, are historical entities. So they are designed at a specific time, in a specific context, to enable novel solutions to given problems. Certainly, most successful concepts in audio programming might only be appreciated or fully understood when they are enclosed in the narrative of groundbreaking new technologies and when showing how the possibilities of music making have been enhanced by them. So let's have first a look about how the discourse in computer science evolves. So when it comes to computer science, I found that common and well-known concepts which play a role in paradigm research are level of abstractions, programming paradigms, concept of implementation, and of course metaphors. And I'm convinced that the discussion of at least two of them is so widely known that I don't have to go into detail. But about level of abstractions, the term level of abstractions refers generally to the distance between a programming language and the underlying hardware. Therefore, it offers a hierarchical and typological understanding. So lower level languages, such as assembly, require dealing directly with the hardware. You have to, values have to be loaded into registers, interrupts have to be written, and knowledge of byte ordering and also other CPU design related details are of the essence. Higher level languages, such as Lisp, Python, Perl, free the programmer from such a task. However, in some languages, such as C, you still have to do hardware-related work like memory management, and which other higher-level language free you from. So this is be dealt with by the garbage collection, for example. While being unburdened from the architectural design of the hardware, higher-level language offer an ontological freedom. For example, in object-oriented programming, the programmer is able to model her program in terms of the problem domain rather than in terms of the machine, as you would if you write this in assembly. However, there is this trade-off between the ability to directly interact with the hardware, which has its advantages, and on the other hand, between this mentioned ontological freedom enabled by the level of abstraction. Also, it can only be stressed out by abstraction. The lower level interactions don't simply disappear, they are just hidden, hence they are referred to as information hiding. Another way of classification of programming languages can be achieved by having a look on the underlying programming paradigms of programming. In a way, those paradigms refer to specific approaches in programming. There are paradigms such as structured or dynamic programming that are less associated with certain languages and more with a specific problem domain. This might be in case of dynamic programming, the parsing of languages or certain optimization problems. In case of structured programming, the division of problems in partial structures or in modules is often understood also as the divide and conquer. However, there are paradigms that are closely tied to how to program in a specific language. For example, the imperative paradigm, most known paradigm, it's a common notion of programming telling the machine step by step what it has to do, so it's more like a cooking recipe. Declarative or logical paradigm do not focus on specifying the execution order, but concentrates on the problem description and leaves the concrete execution ordering completely to the respective programming languages, such as it's done in Prolog. And functional programming offers similar capabilities, yet it can be understood as the composition of functions as known from mathematics. For a given input, a function always produces the same output. There are no side effects, there are no state changes. So this makes it easier to mathematically reason about programs written in functional programming languages. As already mentioned, object-oriented programming allows the programmer to model in terms of the problem domain. Now, while it seems obvious that the choice for a certain paradigm should be an informed choice and a choice with respect to the problem domain, often other motives rule the decision process for or against a certain paradigm. So, Paul Graham shows in his article Beating the Average, that programming languages are habits of mind. Therefore, many researchers in the field of computer science stress the importance of gaining metalinguistical knowledge and the ability to transform from one paradigm to another. While level of abstractions in programming paradigms offer a typological way of speaking about programming languages, the concept of implementation touches on ontological aspects of programming. In his article, Implementation and Semantic Interpretation, William J. Rappaport approaches implementation. He stresses that implementation lacked a strong definition and is often merely understood as realization of an abstraction or an algorithm in code. But Rappaport argues that implementation is a semantic task. It is the relation between a syntactic domain, that's the manipulations of sign, and a semantic domain, that would be the real execution of the code. Also, he describes the relation between semantic and syntactic domain. And he wrote, typically we understand one domain, the syntactic one, in terms of an antecedently understood domain, the semantic one. And he offers a simple formula for the relation between implementation and implemented media. He wrote, I is implementation in some medium M of an abstraction A. A more verbose or clear notion of implementation can be found as well. To implement is to construct something out of the materials at hand that has the properties of the abstraction. It could also be to find a counterpart that has those properties. Both tasks are semantic. While this is a relational aspect of implementation, it can also be understood as the process of filling in details. So from an abstract pseudocode is enriched with more and more implementational details, and then until a valid input for a programming language is created. However, without being executed, the program still has its representational form, its abstract form. That's why Report calls it abstract implementation. Only when it's executed in the processor it becomes the concrete implementation. So there are two notions of implementation as well. Much more can be said about this concept. However, I hope that it becomes clear that the reflection upon implementation is necessary in order to think about how programming languages or tools might shape the musical result. While level of abstractions, programming paradigms, and even implementation are fundamental concepts that can be found in every introduction to computer science, the impact of Metaverse is less often mentioned. Gary Shield and Timothy Colburn devoted a whole article to this topic, and they describe the fundamental role Metaverse play in computer science. Computer science Metaverse, they say, provide a conceptual framework in which to situate constantly emerging new ontologies of computational environments. Therefore, metaphors have important functions in computer science. They are used in the mediation of knowledge about programming. They are also used as design objective, and in a third notion, they are used as they are utilized to create similarities between other scientific domains and computer science in order to transform methods. So, Schulten Colburn gives examples to all three of them. For the educational purpose, or the pedagogical role, metaphors such as looping and jumping in regard to execution order, or throwing or catching in the case of error handling have been addressed by them. Now there is no actual physical movement in other than maybe electrons involved in nowadays computing. But these concepts are easy to grasp and therefore illustrate quite well what happens on this abstract level with regard to the execution order. The design-oriented role has been illustrated by them with regard to the implementation of files and folders in the context of operating systems, or buttons, drop-downs, menus, windows in the context of GUI design. But also data structures such as the queue, where objects or events are lined up and have to be processed in a sequential order, serve as an example as a design objective. And for the scientific role, they write, by prescribing similarities that must be enforced in the programmer's computational world, metaphors help programmers treat the discipline scientifically, so to benefit from the attendant formal and analytical tools and methods. All of those concepts, level of abstraction, programming paradigms, and metaphors and implementations are intertwined and touch upon paradigmatic thinking. They also can be found in the discourse of computer and art, as well as computer music. Within the discussion of computer and art, the educational aim has been addressed, for example, by Holly Humphreys. In a philosophical inquiry into the nature of computer art, Humphreys claims that students need to understand the nature of their art tool and medium of choice. While she doesn't explain the extensionality of such an understanding, the division between art tool and medium is being expressed. This division can be interpreted also in terms of the process of implementation, where the art tool refers then to the syntactic domain, and while the medium of choice implements the produced abstract implementation. The educational aim reveals problems and raises questions. For example, what is the appropriate paradigm to access the underlying problem domain? Also, design principles and design objectives are often the means to convey the principles of programming. How do they relate to the underlying problem domain? The interdependency between production and technology has often been expressed. I merged the resulting question from this discourse into one. To what extent do hardware and software shape the result in their offering of options to artists? Software tools, but also programming languages, offer options, be it in terms of concrete parameters or arguments of functions, or in terms of available abstract data types. The program is the result of a decision process. The program itself can therefore be understood as one result in a set of possible outcomes determined by the offered options. Related to this interdependency between production and technology is the notion of constraints and limitations inscribed in the act of programming or using tools to produce art. Nina Kennedy defines such constraints as fundamental limits on our ability to think, perceive, and create. To what extent limitations or constraints to have impact on an artistic process is being discussed quite differently. While Kennedy sees constraints as fruitful force, freely chosen by the artist, others understand them as mainly prohibitive for a creative process. Computers are not neutral tools. Comments like this by Matthias Fuchs can be found in the field of computer music and audio programming languages. Fuchs himself suggests a systematization of audio programming languages that does not focus on the means of music productions, for example, whether audio programming languages produces a score or is used for synthesis purposes, but rather he argues on specific features of the unmusical computer language. This necessarily leads to the concept of programming paradigms, although he suggests a slightly different order a slightly different typological order. Fuchs argues that a division between representational and performative aspects, or between compositorial structures and sounds, would go against the very idea of electronic music that, as he puts it, ever attempted to cross the border between them. So the focus on the output of a program might be a score or a sound, or the focus on the basic structure of the musical design may be note or unit generators are not advisable criteria of distinction of audio programming languages. Overcoming this division between structure and performance has been discussed recently by Miller-Paquette. In the case of Pure Data, he identifies this separation between and suggests new approaches for bringing them closer together. So the division between representation and performance is prevalent in current audio programming languages, and indeed taking its effect. Regarding requirements, and therefore touching on the question of the domain computer music, I found two, well, not necessarily opposing ideas, but ideas with different emphasis. Holberg mentions that new compositional concepts are necessary that are suitable for computer music systems, while on the other hand, Andrew Gerstrom requests, amongst others, the incorporation of the musical vocabulary as they emerge in musical practice. I think it becomes clear that that would be a challenging task to satisfy both views and requests with only one language or only one paradigm. Also, as demonstrated by in the publication Patterns of Intuition, I don't know whether it's known here, it's written by Gerhard Nierhaus. Once you focus on musical practice and try to formalize it, you end up with vastly different formal approaches and tools. Whether a formal approach or programming paradigm will ever meet fully the requirements of a composer or performer is disputable. Nick Collins in his work on live coding, mentions this trope of the division between human decision making from the rigidity of the machine. And he sees such a struggle of the musician with the code best demonstrated in live coding. Instead of a conclusion, I'd like to raise questions that result from the presented concepts and which serves as some of my research questions. So we've seen that limitations and constraints evolve from the chosen paradigm at level of abstraction. With respect to them, what limitations and constraints do we encounter in audio programming? Paradigmatic thinking is facilitated or governed by metaphorical frameworks. Which metaphorical frameworks are utilized in audio programming languages? And according to Rappaport, implementation is a semantic task. The syntactic domain is antecedently understood by its semantic domain. What can be found out about the semantic domain, audio, when examining audio programming languages? So, thank you for listening. And if you have questions.
Thank you for the great and interesting presentation. I think it's always important to hint on paradigms. So, are there questions or remarks or answers to the raised questions of the last slide? Maybe you can go one step back, because I think there are some interesting thoughts in it. So, ideas maybe. Yes, you were pretty immediately synchronized. So maybe we start in the middle and.
I just wanted to know if you could give us some examples of how Miller has addressed the representation problem, or
Yeah.
or
I actually have it with me, but it would be too long to.
if it's,
He actually introduces pointers in order to resolve the problem between what's in there in pure data right now and what's still missing. So he uses pointers as a new data structure, or introduce that into the language in order to come, as he says, this division.
pointers.
Pointers,
Okay.
the data type. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, here's a suggestion, a metaphorical framework. I think there's a very basic metaphorical framework which is all over sound softwares, which is the framework of music, and especially pop music, which is limiting sometimes very much the development of other auditory forms. So I think we find it all over, and when we are in our practical work at our lab, we always come to the point where we say, but you know, we don't want to make, don't want to think in musical terms. We want to think in overall terms, where we want to think in experimental radio art terms, and we then find often not the expression for it or the tool for it within the software.
That is interesting.
Yeah, we come often to the point. I'm sorry, I can't give you on the spot some examples on it, but I think if we sit together for half an hour or so in our lab, I think we often come to this point where we say, well, it's not mirrored. What we want to do is not mirrored in the tools which the software is giving to us, because it's stuck with a musical concept, and especially a pop musical concept.
Actually, I'm quite relieved that you said that, because I'm working in a very theoretical environment, and to hear that from artists or applied context is quite interesting. Yeah.
So it needs a rethinking of the software designers and of this overall, let's say, a metaphor, and the metaphor of it has to change.
But, yeah.
To hang in there, or to respond also to this, for example, I work with Machine, which is a program that is really sequencer based, and really also in its design very, very dependent on rhythmics. And sometimes I come to the point where I am very happy that this program especially is also very keen on including hardware which is especially designed to work with the software. It also gives the relief to go away from the sequencer patterns and rhythmic patterns to get in touch with something and reading from the patternized mode of looking at this in the program itself. So they can emphasize the rhythmic nature of the program, but also it can relieve you from this and give you another side on the things you are doing.
Interesting.
Just those two are interconnected, so I would like to answer. Those paradigms or those programming languages are not like blocks. They're not static. They are. You can communicate or network with them, or the UDP or TCP IP or whatever, so you can connect different paradigms with each other. But the idea of emergence within a single paradigm is a little bit problematic. And also the division of thinking. I'm doing this in a specific context, or I'm doing the rhythm in a sequencer-based surrounding, and then I'm dealing with the sound or the pitches on this. So there's this division, and I don't know whether this leads to emergence effect. I don't know whether it's understand.
Yeah, so I think it's maybe one last comment on this.
Another comment. Of course, when you're dealing with sound software, you deal with parameters. And this, of course, has brought into the overall discussion on electronic sound arts or music in general, or an overall sound and music art, a kind of parametrical or parametrized thinking, which has really gone into the discourse. So, it's about legitimizing now that when you're composing something, that it's based on parameters instead of seeing the parameters just as a tool, or not at all considering parameters as an artistic goal. Now the parameterization has become a kind of artistic goal in that for many, many people, and this is a critique which I think is very much related to the software parameterization.
One important thing I have to say before I leave you. I'm not criticizing, I'm just stating. I'm a fan of programming and
Yes,
love
of
audio
course,
programming
yeah.
languages. just say that, but maybe as a musicologist I have some old-fashioned views also about music, that formal approaches to music and structures which are not there anymore in certain parts of electronic music. And so this idea of paradigms is most interesting for me. Or the Parametrisierung is quite a good thought. Thank you.
So thank you very much. I think there's also still huge potential for discussion, but I would like to go on with our last presenter for today's paper session, Gart Payne. He's an internationally renowned composer, scholar, and acoustic ecologist. He's a professor of digital media and interactive media at the Arizona State University, and there at the School of Arts, Media and Engineering. This year he was, or still is, artist in residence and researcher at the ZKM and Dieburg. And yeah, we are looking forward to your today's paper.
Right, thank you. Cool. Thank you. If you have a moment during this talk, I want to demonstrate something at the end, and I would ask you to direct your phones to this network called Future Perfect, which I'm running down here, and to open your browser and go to 10.0.1.2. It'll say, welcome to Future Perfect, touch the screen, and then tell me where you are in the room and submit that. And the more of you that do that, the better, because I want to create a sonic ecology across your phones at the end of today's presentation. Okay, so I'm going to open today by just some very quick background to explain to you why I'm making the piece that I'm going to talk about today. So back in 1996, in the late 90s, I made a number of interactive environment works. And these pieces, this is an example of one of the Moments of a Quiet Mind, would change based on human behaviour within them. So tracking the movement of people in the space, and in this case moving from quite meditative space when people were communally meditative or still together, through to if people were really running around and going crazy, very, very intense environments. And this raised for me not only the fact that digital media allows us to start to explore these kinds of interactive environments and to make these spaces together, but actually also the question of what are preferential behaviours, what are preferential environments, and how do we arrive at these decisions communally, for instance, within an art installation. I took this also into a range of dance works. I'm going to show you a very quick example of one. In this case, Dark Edge of Night with the dancer Helen Sky, and she's wearing biosensors on the body, and all of the material of this work is made in the moment from her voice and gesture and biosignals. So the work begins as an empty vessel and becomes an ecosystem as a performance system during the performance. Work, the audience sit in the work, it's projected across the entire building. This is her voice changing, and you'll see biosensors on her arm, around her head, on her other arm. And as she starts to do these gestures, you'll see that the world starts to break up and so on. So this is an evolutionary world generated by the performer in the time of performance. So this is some background work. In Arizona, we've been running the Listen project that I started in 2014, which is a very large-scale project across the southwest of the US, and started for me from the inspiration that, first of all, the natural environments are spectacular, and secondly, that many people who live near them don't go into them because often they don't have the money and the time and so on. And secondly, these people are often also concerned with climate impact and don't know what to do about that because they don't live in a big city, they can't protest, they're kind of stuck in the middle. So we started this project which has a bunch of questions that are really based around these core community engagement activities, which is listening workshops and field recording workshops. And we've just finished a whole series of these in Joshua Tree, so that we're in Joshua Tree every 6 weeks this year, running listening and field recording workshops and training volunteers in the community to make recordings for us at the same location every month continuously. And this has been going on for 4 years. So the project is based around these ideas of exploration, experience and engagement, and critical to all of these things is building this sense of both agency and stewardship about the environments around which people actually live, and that are obviously very critical to us. So I made this little 1-minute video on listening, which I'll share with you.
Sound is part of our memory. It has a physicality that allows us to be utterly present or transported to a special place. It's also why I'm drawn to nature like Joshua Tree National Park, dry desert, never silent but subtle, fragile, sparse. Movement of wind, the song of cactus spikes, the dry wings of a dragonfly. Last spring, heavy rain filled the dam there, teeming with life, frogs, ducks, canyon wrens, owls and bats. You could hear a remarkable ecological transformation. Listening is a powerful experience. We sense the size of place, the density of the air, the surrounding events. It's also a trainable skill. Pick a sound and focus on every tiny little detail. Or shift your attention listening to the interactions. This is the acoustic ecology. Usually we don't think about how we listen, but when we do, the world becomes remarkably richer.
And so through engaging people in thinking about listening and actually helping them discover that they already have the skills and that we can give them names, and then they have a defined, formalised practice that they can go on practicing. We've engaged quite a lot of people in voluntarily recording for us. All of those recordings come in, get tagged, get put in an online database, and so at ecolisten.org you can go and search them and listen to those recordings online. So this is also in part about kind of democratising access to listening to these environments. And then we also have commissioned a number of works, and I've composed a number of works that we take back into these communities as concerts, multi-channel concerts, composed only from the sounds of the environments there. There's a little list of some of the pieces that I've composed. And this comes back to this beautiful sign in Athens: environmental protection relies on the citizen's culture. And so this is a role where acoustic ecology can be so powerful, which is to engage people directly in having some form of stewardship in the environment that they live in. In addition to that, I was on the Oculus Kickstarter early on, and because I thought, well, we could start bringing these environments to people in urban environments. And we launched this at South by Southwest in 2014, and really started to take these national parks that, again, a fairly elite activity to have the right car, the money, the time, the camping equipment and so on to be there, and to take them into schools, aged care homes, into all kinds of marketplaces on the weekend and so on, and to really start to think about how do we democratise access and build a broader engagement with the necessity to protect and engage with these environments. And the kids in the schools get so excited and they're like, I want to go there, where is this, and so on. And we've also started looking at how these can be applied in nursing homes and in terms of general well-being, and we're starting a project looking at hospital recovery rates if people are able to be in nature through virtual reality post-surgery. Because there's good research that says that if you can see out a window and engage nature after surgery, you leave hospital considerably earlier than if you cannot. Now, obviously, this has all been a bit, many people are still like, oh, VR, it's all kind of weird, but this is the kind of trend of how ubiquitous this is becoming. And so the ability to engage people through this medium is I think, really valuable. So I tell you all that because it leads to the piece that I'm making this year, Future Perfect, and that I was, fortunate enough to be awarded this residency for the whole year between EarCam and ZKM to make this work. And it's a large-scale concert experience using high-order ambisonics and smartphone virtual reality technologies, and we've developed a smartphone sound diffusion spatialization system that I want to demonstrate to you today. It's also thinking about VR and immersion as a creative space, not just a documentation space, and not a gaming space per se. And it explores this scene between the virtual as a documentation space and environmental research and the question of archiving nature in VR and this creative space. But it also explores these ideas: what if nature as we know it exists only in virtual archives in 10 or 20 years, right? If impact of climate impact is what we think it could be. And also this notion of this virtual space, a hyper-real, imaginative world containing a technological mediation, can be a kind of presence place for the individual to be, and yet to communally share, in this case in a concert experience. It also draws on the fact that when I go out and record, I record for several hours at a time. I like to lie on the ground, and I've come to think about this kind of subtle body listening, and I introduced this term in 2014 at the Ecomusicologies conference, somophony, which means subtle, soma, the subtle body listening. The idea that we listen with the whole body, and in fact that it's the phenomenology of listening, of modes of listening, that's really important. And this comes down to a question of how are you present? When you listen, how are you present in the listening experience, and to what extent your ego is part of that, I guess is what it comes down to. The work also draws on the ideas of Haggerstrand, and I love this quote: "The big tapestry that nature is weaving is woven because all things have a temporal vector that a mesh." Right? This idea of meeting. It really beautifully, for me, summarises the notion of ecology and the fact that dynamic systems are there that are interacting, that are correspondent, codependent and interdependent, and that this point is where life itself is both made and presenced, where we engage and experience it. So it's exploring this notion of the real and the surreal. And between these points is a porous seam, a seam through which things can pass. So the high order composition starts with dynamic sound collage of the sounds of Paris, coming to an abrupt end with the slamming of a very large door. The reverb tail settles and the audience into a space, and in parallel into a new listening space, a still, quiet place out of which slowly crickets appear, nature. It is in this space that the listener is then really asked to consider the experience of deep listening as a form of presence, being present. How do we be present? What is presence? And it in fact takes another 25 minutes, the work is 45 minutes long, for the human voice to re-emerge in the work. And it re-emerges with this beautiful poem, James Joyce poem, about the seabird. And the seabird as a point of observation, of water, of flowing, of ecology, of the transformation of the world. So the piece started with this idea that high order ambisonics and wave field synthesis was the initial proposal, and I've had great fortune to work on amazing, well you can't really see them here, but high density wave field system at MPAC, and really to use these incredible systems that are fantastic. And then it's like, okay, great, I want to tour this piece and play it all over the place. And I was like, yeah, well, not everybody has a wave field, and I can't afford to build one, and so on. And then the higher order ambisonic systems here at ECAM Studio 1 and the Kubus at ZKM are really wonderful places in which to think about immersion, engulfment, and so on. So I'm just going to play you a very brief portion of the beginning of the work. As you can see, this Paris soundscape, hopefully this sound will work. Yes, good. This is a VR video, so you can look around it, and if you were wearing a headset, you would be able to explore that in a range of different ways. So as I came to think about the high order ambisonics and so on, I also started to think about the fact that the sound field is out here. Can't get a wave field to bring all of that in there necessarily everywhere. And I started to think about the cell phone that everybody's carrying around their pocket. So I started to think about, well, how could I use your cell phone as a sound source in the work to bring the sound directly to you? Of course, in order to do that fully, I need to know where your phone is. So I started doing a bunch of research on building a virtual world and walking around Paris to see if I could get back to the virtual tree that I'd planted somewhere and so on. And using this Navisense tool, able to get actually quite high accuracy. So in the work, I'll be able to know exactly where you are in the space. And then we use the ECAM Cosima project, the Collaborative Situated Media Framework, to build a web audio framework, which is built in JavaScript. And that allows me to connect the phones to a server here. Hopefully, if you have time to connect there. I only saw a few here a minute ago, but if you'd like to connect. And then through that I was able to build a interface so that I could selectively send you sounds to your phone, but perhaps more importantly, if I know where you are, I have an interface that allows me to do spatialization of the sounds that are on your phones. In other words, to send sound through the audience, to grow sound out from inside the audience, to send sounds directly to you.
With me, it doesn't work. I don't know.
What do you want to work?
They're too connected.
Did you connect to Future Perfect first? Yeah? And then in your browser go to 10.0.1.2.
I mean, if the others work,
And it should say welcome to...
if you have enough, it's fine. I just want to...
Okay. I have a few people here. Yeah, they're growing. Excellent. Great, thank you. If you have, unfortunately, there's a bug in the iPhone 4, which means that it's not working at the moment on iPhone 4 if you have an iPhone 4. Anyway, then in addition to that, you've seen a little bit of the film that I'm building in VR, which I can also serve to you using web VR. And so I'm going around recording high resolution VR footage in urban parks in both Paris and Karlsruhe. And of course, this is an interesting and kind of dichotomy, which is the question of constrained urban nature within the park space is, I think, an interesting conundrum. And here's Paris in February. It's bloody cold, and some footage that I recorded there. And you can see that as I'm just turning this into something I could show you, but that when you're in the headset.
I think I know what the problem is. Sorry, it's not a slash, it's a 1. 1,
Yeah.
1 0
10.0.1.2.
In German, the 1 has actually a little, it's,
Okay.
you have the
These are
American
all numbers. 10.0.1.2.
10.1.2.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I've got about 9 of you now. Thank you. So here you can see, you can look around. So this also means that the audience members have some independence about their perspective. They'll be able to walk around the environment. Each audience member will show up as like little clouds in the environment and so on. So then when we come back to thinking about presence, the high order ambisonic score is of course wonderful at enveloping us, of having a sense of engulfment, of being in this incredibly rich sonic space. However, that space is always somehow there. It's a sound field that we are in. We are separate to the sound field. And you'll notice that Haggerstrand uses this notion of being enmeshed, of being part of being integral to the environment in which we are. So the more I thought about that, I started to think about using your cell phones. And so this is, again, those numbers. And I just want to demonstrate a little bit of that. Thank you very much. Here now, so that you can get the idea about how do we come from the loudspeaker system into the audience. Of course, with only a few phones here, this is going to, it won't have as big an effect when we have hundreds of people. And I've had the pleasure of doing this with 300 people, and you get really thick textures in the audience. So, yes, okay, so what you're hearing in the background is some of the score that I've composed, the ambisonic score. And now what I want to do is to add into that some of these sounds. So for instance, here on my iPad, I can see where you've all told me you are in the space. And now if I make this, when I touch that, hopefully you can see there's a circle. I'll make it a bit smaller for this space. And now if I move it, I'll turn your phones up full, by the way. If I start to move it across your phone, you'll start having footsteps. So if I make that a little bigger, we can make a texture across here. And so now if I send you some crickets, then we'll grow some crickets in the space together. all quite closely clustered together, so obviously the spatial effect is kind of minimized here. But you get this sense that it's not in the speaker anymore, you're part of the performance, right? You're in the sound, you are the soundscape. So in addition, of course, then I can play these directly on your phone, like so, and then send you another sound on top of that, so that we can start to build up textures, and then do this, right? And have sound creatures that are literally running through the audience. And all your phones are on a central clock, so the timing of these gestures is really quite precise. And then start to build up, just to finish, some more musical textures, for instance, such as these. Etc. I set the crickets to loop on your phone, so they're going to stay there a little while in the background. So this is obviously a very quick demonstration here about these ideas of how we bring the sound into the audience space and engage the audience as producers of sound in the work. And whilst I've designed this for this work, I'm actually very excited about the ideas of being able to make ecosystem, educational projects and so on with people with their phones. And the whole ability to actually start to make concerts that actually don't need infrastructure at all, and just a router and a PowerPoint or a power outlet, and we could make, concerts anywhere, in parks anywhere we like. So I have a couple of concerts coming up for this one, December 8, if you happen to be anywhere near Karlsruhe, or can come for the Insonic Festival and experience the whole thing in Paris next March. And then, as I say, excitement about a whole range of future projects. So, thank you for listening.
So thank you for the inspiring talk, I think. So I'm sure there are questions or comments on this. Yes, Amanda.
I have a question. I'm also working with VR right now, and I am in a very early stages of the project, and I really have to go to the first and very paradigmatic question in the Unity project on whether if I will work with the Google Cardboard glasses or the amazing sonic experience that you can have as well, or not, in a more advanced way with the Oculus system. So one is you have more access to other people, right, with the Google glasses, and then you are kind of like cutting a lot of technical and especially sound enhancements on technology. So in your way, like how this mediation between accessibility of the technology and the medium to experience this was?
So there's there are sets of tools to work with ambisonic sound recordings, and all the recordings I make are ambisonic. And you can deploy those on any hardware platform, from Google Cardboard, which is phone-based, obviously, through to high-end. I was involved with and like to use the Blue Ripple sound products that are, they have a Unity toolkit for ambisonics. And then that will allow you to attach the head tracking to the ambisonic and give you a binaural output so that you get changing visual and auditory perception at the same time.
Using headphones.
Yes.
You are using your phone, because that's key, right? You cannot
Correct.
just like that.
Using the phone,
That's
putting it
easy.
in a, well, you can hold the phone, but it's much better if it's in a headset and then a pair of headphones,
Okay, thank you.
Please, other questions, comments? Oh, I'm surprised. But I really understand that you're excited about this idea.
Yeah.
It's it's really amazing to implement such a low threshold artistic experience. And I was amazed, I don't know how it was with you, how these small smartphones sounded here. So I was really surprised.
Yeah, like
actually,
really when you have like, you know, well, there's only 3 of you left there now, but when you have like 300 people in the audience, this gets really quite loud.
Yeah.
And in the first half of the work that I performed maybe 10 times, all of the material in the loudspeaker has disappeared for the last 5 minutes of the work, and nobody realises that it's just the phones. Obviously you need to design the phones, the spectral content of the sound, to work with the loudspeaker in the phone, and so these kinds of sounds, you know, that I've played you today, footsteps, crickets, etc., etc. Even this sound. There are only 2 of you now, but anyway, all these sounds are really designed to perform well on the speaker in the phone.
This explains a little bit that it sounds that good.
Yeah, it's true.
So really interesting. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you have made this open source or plan on making it open source, because there's just so many cool possibilities.
Yes, there are, aren't there? Yes, it will be open source. Probably not until next year, because I need to finish the project. Then we need to document it appropriately so that when we release it, people understand what they're supposed to do with it. But yes, it'll be on GitHub next year and available for people to use.
Yeah, I could imagine like things like protest actions or also like flash mob actions where you use that on like places in the city.
Yes,
very cool.
I'm about, at the end of this month I'll go back to ECAM for a couple of weeks where we'll finish building a granulator into the system, which is for the second half of the work, where the human voice will start pocketing across the space and generating grains across the phones and so on. So this, yes, I've also thought this would be an interesting protest kind of system.
You needed one these days.
Right.
Did you already thought about also using the vibrational effects of the phones? So to create a more embodied and tactile vibrating composing component with it.
Yeah. Yes, I can see how that parallels with the work that you've been doing very well. I haven't thought about that, although in the final work, when people are in the VR space, which will also be served to you through the browser, they'll be wearing the phone on the head in a headset. So then actually it'll be quite close to the head. And I haven't yet really explored how much that sound then vibrates the skull.
Okay, so I see others are inspired too, but unfortunately we have to close the session. But still there's some room and space and time left for discussion or outside of this paper session. So thank you, Dr.
Thank you so much.
Also together.